He was my shelter. He was my helper. Every time, I'd start to go crazy, he would always get me. He would calm me down. We slept in the same room together, in the temple. And we were so poor. I mean, gosh, I don't know if you folks these days in ISKCON can understand what it means to be poor, but we were really poor back then. And in Buffalo is no joke. Buffalo is on one of those great lakes. Buffalo is so direly freezing cold in the wintertime, and it's wet cold, and we used to, like if you would go over to Giriraj Swami Maharaj's house, I guess during the hot season or winter season, something like that, they put plastic on the windows, maybe to keep the cold out or to keep the heat out. I'm not sure what the situation was. In Buffalo, we had all the windows covered with plastic just to keep the snow from coming inside, because that's the way it was. We were poor people. But we slept together in the same room. We'd do our service all day long. He taught me how to cook. He was my first cooking guru. He taught me how to cook. I joined in June, September, the outstanding preaching program that it was at the State University of New York at Buffalo. It began, and I don't know if any of you all here know the history of the State University of New York preaching program, but this gentleman here, he came from that program. Prahladananda Swami came from that program. Trivikram Swami came from that program. Narottamananda came from that program. Bhagawan came from that program. Krishna Bhamani came from that program. Who else? Prahladananda Maharaj. Jagadish came from that program. Lakshmi Moni came from that program. The lion Rupanuga was preaching there, and it was one of the most productive preaching centers. And Rupanuga's whole idea is make the devotees, train them for some time, send them out to open centers around the world. And when September came, he said, "Sean, you're cooking the feast." And I went, "What?" And he said, "Krishna will empower you." And he just took me like I was his little brother. And he just cared for me. And despite whatever, problems I was having, whatever distress I was having, whatever anxiety I was having, he just loved me and he cared for me like I was his little brother. And I think the only time that Maharaj ever chastised me was because I was 20 years old and crazy and a wild redneck from Tennessee and, a bad false ego. I used to get irritated with his wife sometimes. And one time I got so irritated with his wife. When we were going to take rest in the evening, I was sitting next to Maharaj, and I said, "Maharaj, I just want to take the biggest knife in the kitchen, and I want to use it on your wife." And he looked at me, and this is the only time he ever chastised me. And he said, "You can never speak badly about a Vaishnava." never speak badly about a Vaishnav. Glorify a Vaishnav, never speak badly about a Vaishnav. So he made me a devotee. And he cared for me. And he loved me. And I loved him. And after about a year and a half, he came to me one day and he said, "Hey, they're going to install Radha Gopinath up in Toronto." He said, "Let's go up for the installation ceremony." And we used to have the Bernstein brothers, Lokavarnatam and Muktakesh, and one of them had a GTO, and maybe nobody here knows what a GTO is, but a GTO was a hot, fancy car. So me and Maharaj and is either Loka or Mukta, we got in the car and we drove up to Toronto for the installation. And I was standing there, and it's the first time I'd ever seen a Radha Krishna deity. And I was looking at Radha Gopinath, and I was praying, and I was praying, and I was praying, "Save me, save me, save me." And when it was time to go back to Toronto, or time to go back to Buffalo, I looked at Gunagraj Maharaj. I said, "Prabhu, could I stay here for 2 weeks and just get some inspiration?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "You should do what will inspire you to serve Prabhupada more." And so he said, "You stay here for 2 weeks." Then 2 weeks later, I was in the office in the Toronto temple. The phone rang. Jagadish picks up the phone. "Hello, ISKCON Toronto." And it's Gunagraj Maharaj on the other end. And he says, "Jagadish Prabhu," he said, I'm phoning about Ayodhyapati. He said, 2 weeks is up. It's time for Ayodhyapati to come back. And Jagadish put his hand over the mouthpiece on the phone, and he said, "It's Gunagrahi. He wants you to come back." And I said, "Please tell him I don't want to go back." And he told him, and if it were me in the position of a temple authority or something like that, I would probably raise such a fit. I would probably create a storm, He said, "My interest is that he will become strong and advance in Krishna consciousness. And if it's better for him to be there so that he can be strong and advance, then I'm fully happy with him being there." And from that time, we never served together over the course of our lives, but we would meet. And it was always that loving relationship. He showed me the path. He brought me in. He gave me the example. He showed me how to do things. He taught me. I remember one time he came and he said, during a Sunday feast program in Buffalo, he said, "I have a reel-to-reel, film of Srila Prabhupada." And we had all heard about Srila Prabhupada, but we had never seen Srila Prabhupada. And he said, "After the Sunday feast, we'll have kirtan and we'll show it." And I remember when they turned the film on and started showing Prabhupada just walking and whatever Prabhupada was doing, I remember everybody in the temple room, they just all started crying to see Krishna's pure devotee. And then Maharaj got cancer. And I was in Dallas, I guess 3 years ago, for the kirtan they have there at the New Year. And he was there, and they came out that he had cancer, and the situation didn't seem so favorable. And we had a real reunion then, but our reunion was just like bathed in tears. All we could do was just cry in the arms of one another, because he saved me. He made me a devotee. He acted on behalf of His divine grace, and He picked me up from birth and death. And then eventually He came here to Vrindavan, and because my travel schedule is so crazy, whenever I'd pop into Vrindavan, since we were neighbors, since he was living at Srila Giriraj Swami's house next door, I would go over and see him, and we would talk. And I'd always, before leaving, I'd always say, look, I'm going to be back here on a certain date. You can't leave this world before I get back. And I used to tell him, listen, if you leave this place before I get back over here, I'm going to come find you and I'm going to kill you. And then when we were in Houston this last week, His Holiness Indradumna Sai Maharaj, His Holiness Giriraj Sai Maharaj, and myself, we phoned, and Maharaj was, and I told Maharaj I was going to be back on the 7th. And Maharaj was still, he was very weak, but I told him, I said, you cannot leave until I get back. So I got back. I made him promise me, you cannot leave this place till I get back. I said, you brought me in, I've got to be here when you go out. And we got here, and when I went over to the hospice, when I first went over there, he was really sort of kind of real hazy. And I got right up in his face and I told him, I said, this is Govinda Swami. You kept your promise, you know. You stayed alive till I got back. And the most slight smile came on his face. And then you've heard the rest. It was just kirtan, and the last day was extraordinary because I don't know what time it was, but at some point the doctors, the wonderful doctors in the hospice, they had their flashlights, and they were like opening his eyes, and they were checking for any sort of reflex from his eyes, and there was no response. And then that wonderful doctor down there, he said, we're giving him the maximum amount of oxygen, but he's not able to take it. So he said, call the devotees. Kirtan should begin now. And so we just started having kirtan, and kirtan, and kirtan. And I led for some time, and then Srila Radhanath Sai Maharaj led, and then Dinbandhu Prabhu led, and then somehow or other it came back around to me, and then I looked at Danishta Mataji, and Danishta went like this, and she pointed at Ramai, because Maharaj really, really loved Ramai Pandit's chanting. And Maharaj had told Ramai, said, when I die, I want you to be here chanting for me. And so as soon as Dhanishta went like that, I just immediately gave the microphone to Ramai. And at a certain point, around 3:30, the situation was looking more and more critical. And those wonderful doctors, I don't know their names, but they were saying, look, you guys go for it now. Really rip the kirtan, take the, just blast the ceiling off. And the kirtan was becoming stronger and stronger and stronger. And because I love Maharaj so much, I wanted to be chanting when he passed away from his body. But Ramai was chanting. And this was the amazing thing, that from the afternoon, he had been in quote, unquote, unconscious state. But I got into Maharaj's ear, and I was just screaming with everything I had in my heart, Hare Krishna! And when I would scream, Hare Krishna, his lips would respond, Hare Krishna. And it's not fantasy. There's recordings. You can see it. We saw it. Akiladhar heard it. We were he had been in what they said an unconscious state for hours, but the soul is never unconscious. And we were screaming Mahamantra, and he was responding. And he left his glorious life in that way. A life of total devotion to His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. And a lot of you young folks are here to take into Krishna consciousness, and that's glorious. It always looks good. There's always bumps on the road. And despite whatever bumps may have been there, Maharaj chanted the Lord's holy names at the time of his passing. And according to the words of Srila Shukadeva Goswami, that is what assures a human being's perfection in life. So now it's victory for Maharaj. He's become victorious over the material nature. He has gone to Goloka Vrindavan. He's associating with Krishna and his friends. And I just really want to, in front of all of my esteemed Vaishnav godbrothers, in front of all the esteemed Vaishnavs who are sitting here in front of me, I would like to just say that I'm here today because of the love and the grace of Gunagrahi Goswami Maharaj. Gunagrahi Goswami Maharaj ki.
Thank you, Maharaj. So I want to ask Mahahari Prabhu, also Jagan Nivas, who served Maharaj for the time he was here in Vrindavan.